Okay, the time is 6 p.m. on January 21st, 2021, and I would like to call this meeting of the Growth Management Oversight Commission to order. In the interest of public health and safety and pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order N2920, members of the Growth Management Oversight Commission and staff are participating in this meeting by teleconference. In accordance with the executive order, and the public may view this meeting online, but not in council chambers. The city has launched a virtual commenting portal, eComment, that allows residents to comment and participate in the meeting from their own homes. You can find the link for eComment at www.chulavistaca.gov/virtual-meetings. Your comments must be received before I call for the closing of the commenting period in order to be considered. After the commenting period is closed, I will announce a brief pause to allow commissioners time to read any comments that have been received. If you have any difficulties or need assistance with eComment during the meeting, please contact the Development Service Department at cramos@chulavistaca.gov, and staff will assist you. Will the secretary please call roll?
Yes. Commissioner Alatorre? Commissioner Caudillo?
Present.
Commissioner Juarez? Commissioner Lengyel?
Here.
Commissioner Strong? Commissioner Torres?
Here.
And Chair Hooker?
Here. Okay, the first order of business is approval of the minutes. I will now call for a 2-minute pause to allow the public to submit any final comments. Commissioners, as a reminder, please refresh your view on the screen to ensure new comments will appear. The commenting period for this item is now closed. I didn't see any comments. Can you verify that, Claudia?
Yeah, I didn't receive any comments via email, and I didn't see comments either.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Commissioner Lengyel, move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Well, if there's no second, I will.
Okay. I have a motion by Commissioner Lengyel and a second by Commissioner Torres. Secretary, could you conduct a roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Caudillo? How do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Lengyel,
Yes.
Commissioner Torres,
Yes.
and Chair Hooker.
Yes.
The motion
Okay, the
carries by
minute-
a vote of 4-1.
4-1.
4-0,
4-0.
sorry.
Okay. The minutes are now approved. Public comments is the section on the agenda for members of the public to address the board on items that are not listed in the agenda. I will now call for a 2-minute pause to allow the public to submit any public comments. Commissioners, as a reminder, please refresh your view on the screen to ensure new comments will appear. The comment period for the public comments is now closed. Did we get any comments, Claudia?
I didn't receive any e-comments.
Thank you. Before we move to the next item, we have some introductions. Kim, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, this is Kim first. Hi, I'd like to introduce Laura Black, who is the new Assistant Director in Development Services. She comes to us from the city of San Diego with just a wealth of experience. And as you know, there's Laura. As you know, Kelly Broughton was promoted to Deputy City Manager, and Tiffany took his place as the Director of DSD. So now Laura is filling Tiffany's old place. So she'll be coming to sit in on our meetings from time to time. And
Welcome, Laura.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. I look forward to working with all of you.
Great. And we're also happy to have the Director of Engineering with us this evening, Mr. Bill Valley, along with Principal Civil Engineer Frank Rivera, who will be giving a presentation on infrastructure management processes, street pavement and sewer capacity monitoring, and an overview of the active transportation plan. And we also have Mr. Paul Oberbauer, Senior Civil Engineer, with us this evening, who will be giving a presentation on traffic engineering operations.
Thanks, Kim. And just a couple more, just a little bit of background on this. Kim and I spent a lot of time with the folks in engineering trying to learn, understand their processes and systems and how they manage things. And we were trying to understand what would be valuable to us in this group as we look look through this quality of life lens. And so I think we've got some real interesting ideas about how they maintain infrastructure and how they track that. And also, as Kim mentioned, the active transportation plan, which is bicycles pedestrian focus. So Frank really has his presentations under two different topics, which one is land use and transportation, and one is a new topic I've added, which is infrastructure. So take it away, Frank.
All right, thank you. So Claude, if you can start the PowerPoint presentation. Good evening, members of the GMOC, Frank Rivera, Principal Civil Engineer, and I'll be presenting on the pavement program, our sewer system or wastewater program, and the active transportation program. Next slide, please. The city has maintained a pavement management system since 1986 in accordance with the California Streets and Highways Code. And so this is one component of what we call the roadway management system as our part of our asset management system citywide. We have an inventory of all the pavement condition of all the roadways in the public right-of-way, and I'll discuss how we go into that process later on. And the primary reason of it is to develop a pavement preservation strategy that maximizes the use of our public funds by applying the various treatments at the appropriate times to extend the service life of the pavement. It's very important because we don't have all the money we'd like to have to maintain the pavement in the best condition. And so there's a process that we go through to make those decisions on our pavement rehabilitation projects. Next slide, please. And in 2007, we had our city council approve the commitment to implementing a true pavement management system. And what that entailed was that the constituency will call us when their street is in a very poor condition and wanting something to be done. It's difficult to explain to them that if that's the approach that we took, our worst first approach, it would be sacrificing the streets in the easy to maintain condition, which are cheaper to maintain. And before you know it, if we just took a worst first approach, we wouldn't have money to take care of the streets, and all the streets would start degrading over time. Next slide, please. So what we've done is the pavement condition is ranked by what is known as a pavement condition index. And it looks at different strategies depending on the condition of the street and how we are to determine the types of construction projects that we need to do. Every 5 years, we have a pavement consultant visually inspect every single public street in the city of Chula Vista. We had a consultant firm that did the evaluation in years 2006, 2011, 2016, and we currently have proposals that we're reviewing for this same service to be done this year. The work will be done towards the middle or summer of this year. And that sort of baselines, again, the information that we have, and we move forward from there. So it's a constant renewing of the program and putting the data once we complete each of our pavement project. And we do use a software that's industry-wide known as Street Saver pavement management system, and it's a common one for a lot of local agencies to use. Next slide, please. So what we have here is the concept of a pavement condition index, or PCI. A 100 is a street in brand new condition, and a PCI of 0 is one that is just it has failed. There is nothing left of the roadway. And what we look at is, and you'll see in the following slides, is we can break each of the range of the PCIs into 5 general categories. And within each category, that starts determining the approach we're going to take to rehabilitate the street. Next slide, please. So here are the 5 conditions. We try to, in green, green is good. So PCI of 70 or greater is a street that's in good, very good, or excellent condition. Once we get into the 50 to 70, that is a little bit more expensive to maintain, but it's still a street that is very serviceable. And depending on the type of failures that we're seeing within the 50 and 70, that helps determine the approach that we will take. In blue, you see a non-load failure on a street, and that just might be some surface cracking kind of generally spread out throughout the entire street. Whereas category 3, a load-based failure might be wheel tracking where the street is generally okay, but right where the vehicles are driving over or trucks driving over it, the street has kind of settled, it has ruts, and it's related to the load that the street cannot take. And then that's going to have to get rehabilitated, probably with a thicker lift of asphalt. Once we get into category 4 and category 5, the streets are starting to look really bad. And category 5, I'll touch upon that later. The street is just very expensive to maintain or to rehabilitate. And that's where Measure P comes in as a program for the city. Next slide, please. So here we're starting with category 5. The PCI is 25 or less, and you can see that the surface is entirely failed. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the wheel tracks or the parking lane or anywhere else, the entire street is in very poor or failed condition. Category 4, you start seeing the poor condition of the roadway. It has localized areas that are failed that we would have to dig out, recompact, fix the issues on there, and then rehabilitate the surface. Next slide. And then this is categories 2 and 3, which is typically where we're going to see a majority of the streets in Chula Vista. And category 1 is going to be the streets that have been recently rehabilitated, or the developer has recently completed them, like within the last 5 to 7 years or less. Next slide. So here we beginning to talk about the Street Saver program, and it's a web-based GIS database. And at the far left column, that's where we see the pavement condition index and the percentage of the streets that we have, that then the maintenance required is just a very thin oil seal or a thin surface treatment. And the range that we would be typically paying is less than $1 to about $2 a square foot. When you start degrading the PCI into the 50 to 70 range, now we're going to need some areas where we have to do some additional work, and the costs are going to be up more, but we might be able to get by with seals. And so that's why you also see that the cost is similar to above, but the dig outs, that really adds up costs to our projects. When you start getting now to the next level down, major rehabilitation, the cost is now $4 or more. And these are just rough numbers, because every time we put out a project to bid, contractors will bid differently. Oil prices also have a major impact on what we're paying per square foot. And so this is just the general guideline. But when you get down to the bottom and we have to completely reconstruct the street, remove everything and start over, it's, you know, $5-6 a square foot, and you're almost 8-10 times maybe what you would do way up at the top of the PCI scale. Next slide. So this is just a graphic of the typical degradation curve that an asphalt street would have. We'd start at the very left of the chart in years. The bottom line, the abscissa horizontal line is in years, and the vertical line is pavement condition. And so red is the street started very good at 100 PCI on the left. And if you do nothing, then you get that sort of reverse curve degradation that by the time you get to 25 or even 30 years out, streets in very poor condition if you did not do any maintenance work. But stick with about a 7 or so year interval where you go in and do a surface treatment, then you get that green spike at year 7. It doesn't quite get to 100, but close enough, you're in the 90s, and then it starts degrading again over time. You do another round of surface seal, and then by the time you're 20, 22 years out, we may have to do a thin overlay, minor rehab. We might have some dig outs, but then you continue to go on. But the point of this is that generally, this is the type of what happens with the degradation over time with our asphalt roadways. And most of the city's roadways are asphalt in nature. And it's just a constant expense for us to maintain the roadways in as good condition as we can. Next slide. So what I have for you is we cannot maintain every street at 100 or as close to that as possible. Our city council, what we have is we have categories of roadways, and you can see that the arterials, which are the highest speed roadways, we have 58 centerline miles, and it total 288 lane miles. So if you drove every street and every mile that's an arterial, it's 288 miles. And there it is in square feet, 22 million square feet. The average pavement condition index as of the end of 2020 or last month is 74. So that's in the green area, the good. The collector streets are going to be the typical grid streets in West Chula Vista, or the north-south streets in eastern Chula Vista. And those are at 71. The residential streets are everything else where typically you're going to have driveways, residential units, cul-de-sacs, the 2-lane streets with the residential housing on it. And those are at 77. And that wasn't always the case. Residential streets, generally, the PCI was below the other two. But for the last couple of years, we've spent a lot of money on the residential streets that were in failed condition with Measure P. And I'll show you that later on. And all of a sudden, now that category, the weighted average has gone up above everything else. The other category tends to be our unimproved alleys, or alleys that were paved initially when they were brand new, and we haven't really gone back to do anything other than maybe pothole repair in the alleys, and those are at 3. When you look at the entire system of 460 centerline miles in Chula Vista, our PCI is 75, which is in the good or the green band of the PCI scale. Next slide, please. So now, how do we pay for all this? Well, if you look at the top of the chart in blue, you'll see the horizontal band. The different, or the 4 major funding sources that we use could work on residential streets. The collectors and arterials, we typically use our gasoline sales tax, Transnet, which is the San Diego County half-cent transit tax, and the gasoline tax. But on the residential, the reason you have that 4th one, or the one to the very left, that's Measure P. And that was a ballot measure that we took to the public in 2016. And we told them it will be only for the streets that have failed and only for residential streets. And that's what we've spent it on, only on those residential streets. So when you look at the bottom of the chart and you see the pavement condition index, 0 to 25 is entirely been Measure P funding, which goes till the year 2027. It's a 10-year short-term half-cent sales tax. And we've spent about $24 million to do all the pavement work. And we're wrapping up our last of the Measure P projects now. The other ones, the gas tax, we will use that to get into the poor or fair condition, and the same thing with Transnet. And then we also can use it up in the upper ranges of the 61 through 85. But those are the decisions that we look at and and decide which streets we can group together, which ones need the similar type of pavement rehabilitation strategy, and then we package those together. And generally, a lot of our work is done outside of the rainy season. Next slide, please. So our goals that council approved was that arterials should be at 80, collectors at 75, and residential streets at 70. So you can see that arterials were at 74, the collectors at 72, and the residential streets at 77. Our pavement management program recommends that we should be spending about $11.5 million a year to maintain what we have and try to get closer to the PCI goals that we've established. But again, the residential streets, yes, we're above the goal by a significant amount, but that was the heavy lift that the Measure P funding source did for us. Our typical funding amount for pavement rehabilitation is actually about that $11.5 million. It's $5 to $6 million a year. And it's just that the Measure P is really the additional money that we were able to take advantage of. Next slide. Nope, you passed one. Go back up one. There we go. This is our report card. We get a monthly status report, which is the one on the right, the landscape one. That kind of tells us, as of this month, what is our pavement condition index, the different roadway classifications. Towards the bottom of it, you see a horizontal green line that has a little bit of a deflection on it, and that's our historical PCI for the system. The report on the left is the annual the monthly report. It goes back and tells us that where we were current PCI 75 at the end of 2020, but 12 months prior, January 1st of 2020, we were at a 73. So we gained system-wide an increase of 2 PCI. It compares us to our peers, cities of similar size. They would have a PCI of 71. So we're in the 90th percentile, which is very good. But again, I think a lot of this had to do with the Measure P funding that we're so grateful to have had. The ring chart on the bottom of the landscape one shows the makeup of the different materials of our roadway system. Generally, asphalt that's the dark blue. The green is also asphalt, but it's asphalt with not really a base material underneath it. Some of the residential streets in southwestern Chula Vista don't really have the typical structural section that we have. And so those have been a struggle for us, and that's what we were taking care of with the Measure P. The rest of the material is really just concrete streets. We do have some concrete streets in the city where the street is very steep, and other areas like the Country Club Estates area by Hilltop and L, First Avenue, where the streets are concrete, but then there was an asphalt layer placed over them when the concrete needed to be rehabilitated. The decision was made to just pave over it. So that's the pavement program. And Kimberly or Kim, should I take questions on the pavement program or continue then to the wastewater?
I think it would be good to take them now while the material's fresh. If people
All right.
have questions, Chairman Hooker.
Yeah, I got a question here. So how does the ACT Chula Vista program fall into this?
Okay, well, that's a
And
good question
reporting.
because we work very closely with our public operations. And so the ACT program sends the request in to a centralized area, and Public Works realizes, oh, this is a street repair or a street request. And if the street request gives us the information that there's a pothole in front of 123 Main Street, okay, the street crews will go out and take care of that. If the request comes in, my street is in such a bad condition, when is it going to get resurfaced? Okay, that's over for the engineering staff to take a look at the pavement program and respond back to the constituent. So that's sort of like the funnel for every service request that the city receives. And it's a good clearinghouse because it gets tracked and we can follow the request from when we receive it to when we respond back to the constituent. So it's kind of an easy way to let the city know that a service request is needed, but the response back just depends on what the question is.
Okay. And then how often are you guys out, I guess, reviewing streets? Are you on a normal cycle, yearly cycle, monthly cycle, or how's that work?
What happens is, yes, we're constantly doing the visual inspection of the streets, but there's a lot of different tasks that different engineers will have or Public Works will have. And when I mentioned earlier that we have the pavement consultant go and drive the city every 5 years, they're actually video recording at high speed with lasers and radars and all sorts of deflection equipment in their specialized trucks, recording all that information and feeding that into the Street Saver program. And the Street Saver program, then it says, okay, this street was driven, the truck said that the PCI is 76. Okay, do nothing, and it already has the algorithms to take into account the typical degradation curve. And if we go back a year later or 2 years later, because we get a request from the public about the pavement condition, we'll say, oh, well, it's at 71 today, because we just looked it up on the Street Saver. But we also have Google Street View. We also drive around in the city, and it's not uncommon for us to say, you know, I'm going to be driving by there later or tomorrow or whenever, and swing by there. Or even our street crews will say, you know what, we're going out there, we'll go check it out. So there's a lot of eyes on a particular location when a request comes in, but the Street Saver is the first thing that we go to see what the PCI is showing for us.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners have questions?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Torres. I have a couple questions.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the question I have is that, I don't know if we can go back to the chart, but you mentioned Measure P, and I want to ask a question. Those streets, residential streets that are in Category 5, I believe, in the most severe disrepair.
Yes.
I would assume that the majority of those streets are in West Chula Vista, correct?
The majority, but not all of them. We had some in like Bonita Long Canyon, a few in East Lake 1, Rancho Del Rey, but generally West and Southwest Chula Vista.
Okay, so am I to understand that the funding from Measure P are to address then those streets that are in that Category 5 throughout the city?
Throughout the city, yes.
Okay, so what has been proportionally now the allocations of those funds relative to Bonita, Rancho Del Rey, West Chula Vista, off the top of your head?
You know what? I would say it's probably like 80% west of 805. Our first street that we did was Floyd Avenue, just east of 805 by East J Street down to Hale Street and Hale Street to Halecrest. That was the first street that we did. So those neighborhoods that were built in the 60s and 70s, they had quite a bit. But remember, Rancho Del Rey's from the 1980s, Eastlake is the 90s and all of that. So those are a lot newer streets.
Right. So let me ask you one final question, is that now I think I saw in the presentation, Measure P is set to sunset in 2027? Yeah. Okay. So that's not too far from today. That's 6 years. Is there going to be a proposal by staff to City Council to extend that a time period, or is it basically set in stone, the sunset?
No, that's set in stone. It was a ballot measure, 10 years, that's it.
Okay,
And
so let me ask you this. I was afraid of that. So let me ask you this, Frank, is that now in master plan communities, primarily on the east side, when developers come to us for new master plan communities, and you've served as staff to planning commission, is that part of their proposal includes a lot of capital improvements, sidewalks, streets, sewers, yada, yada, yada.
Yes.
Now, I was wondering, and they're required to pay for all that, and then naturally the city maintains it thereafter. I was wondering, now on the west side of Chula Vista, where we don't have that land availability for master plan communities, we deal with infill developments. For example, the most recent one the Planning Commission approved was on Moss Street. And the developer, as part of their approval, was that they were required to construct sidewalks, okay, over there on Moss Street where there weren't any.
Yeah.
All right. So my question then is this: has staff thought about, as a condition of approval for West Chula Vista, requiring the developers to fix the streets upon which their development would be abutting, the major thoroughfares or something to that effect, or like a public facilities finance, what is it called, PFFP?
PFFP, Public Facilities Financing Plan. We have not done that maintenance wise for a public street. In Otay Ranch, where you go behind those guard shacks, and once you go through that, the gated communities, those are all private. The HOAs are the ones that maintain all of that.
Right.
But when it comes to a public street, we have not said, okay, we need the public to pay in perpetuity for the maintenance of a facility. Or
at least for a short period of time. And the reason why I'm throwing this out, if Measure P is going to sunset in 2027, then what funding is going to be made available to address those severely impaired streets, the Category 5s? Because like you said at the beginning of your presentation, if we go by worst is first, we're not going to have the monies necessary to deal with a greater expansion of streets. So we gotta make our money stretch as far as we can. So absent Measure P, my thinking is, has staff thought about other ways to generate the funding for those streets, especially on the west side, where a lot of infill development projects are coming online or about to come online? Are you with me?
Yes. And I think here's another way to kind of look at the situation. Over the years, especially in the Montgomery annexation area, south of L Street and west of Hilltop Drive, the street section was just a couple of inches of asphalt on native, the basic ground that was there. It really didn't have a structural section that we had in the city in other areas. So we went in and we've built up the roadway sections that we're going to get a lot more years of use out of them. But we realized those streets were not them. So over the years, we do change our design standards. We do realize that traffic patterns will change, and we've got to do what we need to do to build up the street again. But what's changed also is that over the last 4 or so years, we got the one of the funding sources in there is the Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Act money. And that's about $5 to $6 million. And the Transnet, even though we get about 5 or 6 million, we're spending maybe about 3 to 4 of that in pavement. So I think the RMRA funds is something that's really helping us. We're getting close to that 11 million that we ideally had. And of course, with inflation, the numbers go up. But I think we're in a better situation right now than we were maybe 7 years ago or 10 years ago, where it was triage. You just had to let the residential streets go in order to maintain the arterials and the collectors.
Okay, and if I can, I'll wrap it up real quick. Again, because I'm concerned about funding sources if Measure P is going to sunset. Has staff ever thought, like a CFD, a community facility district, that primarily on the east side? Has staff ever thought about maybe on the west side some kind of benefit assessment district? Where all the property owners on the west side would pull their money so that the streets on the west side, the residential streets now, and the alleyways, where there are some, there would be a constant funding source tied to the properties. Has staff thought about that?
Yeah, I think when it came to the Measure P, the Measure P is what went public. Everything was on the table to discuss what had the best chance of passing. And so I think what you saw was Measure P was the city's best foot forward at the time for what would be successful. There was other experts, consultants that met with the city, and I'm sure that when they laid everything out on the table, realized, yes, this would generate a particular solution, might generate more money, but it's riskier to get it to pass. So I think at the end, Measure P was a combination of a lot of things being put together and presented to the public in the way that it was going to have the highest probability of passing. And so we were fortunate that we were very upfront. We still have the Measure P webpage with all the educational information, all the backup. And so we were very clear with the public, look, here's our situation. Here's what we need. Are you willing to vote and support this item? And so it happened. But we have had those other discussions that you mentioned, Commissioner. I just think that at the time, the probability of those passing was not as high as the ultimate Measure P package that was put forward.
I'm with you. So, and for purpose of the GMOC, I think that's something that we need to think about as part of our report. What's the city going to do post Measure P? And I'll end it at that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Torres. Anybody else have any questions?
Yes, this is Commissioner Alatorre.
Go ahead.
Hi there, Frank. This is Commissioner Ray Alatorre. Just want to say a great job by you and your crew in taking care of all those city streets. Thank you. Well appreciated. Following on that, I was just curious as to how funding is distributed between all the facilities and the engineers? And is some of these projects outsourced, or is everything taken care of in-house?
You mean for the pavement rehabilitation projects?
Yes, sorry.
We do the projects in-house, but we also have consultants that will help us with the field work or the inspection. Just because you have to remember, our typical capital improvement program averages $20 to $30 million a year. But when the Measure P hit our department, our capital program went to about $100 million because it also included police, fire stations, and other improvements that our staff had to work on. So we had to hire consultants to kind of help us through that workload. So some of the engineers I had got moved over to design. Now they're in construction as the workload kind of worked through our department staff. So it was just, however we were able to get the projects out to construction as quickly as possible. We have had to get the assistance of consultants at different phases of work.
And if I could follow up that, so moving forward, as we near the end of Measure P, we're not going to be able to tap into those kind of resources. Are there plans set to somehow compensate for that loss of revenue in the future by either buying machinery, increasing manpower, and so forth?
I couldn't answer that. I think for us, when we look at our pavement program, we really thought about what was the best way to move forward with this. And the fact that on the residential streets, they're sort of starting a new life again. Do nothing. It'll be 20 years or so before they really start looking pretty bad. But we intend to be coming back with the maintenance that you saw, that green bar that put the seals on there, which is a lot less expensive. So I think for us, that's just the importance of staying on top of the pavement management system for us to keep the streets in as best condition we can with the least amount of funds spent on the maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Chairman, I just have a quick comment.
Go ahead.
In response to Commissioner Torres' comments and suggestions on other funding sources, the first you mentioned was, can we require the developers to repair the streets when they do these new infill projects in Western Chula Vista? And that's a great suggestion. Unfortunately, there's laws that prohibit us from requiring developers to make up existing deficiencies. So there has to be a nexus between their impacts, which they might, in the East, you still have developers building all these roads. But in the West, unfortunately, where the old roads exist, we can't require them to improve those. And then you mentioned CFD or benefit assessment. Those are also great ideas. Unfortunately, it's just really difficult to get people to agree to vote to tax themselves or put an assessment on their property. And the reason it works in the East is that those districts are put together before there are any property owners there. And the developers then disclose that you're going to be taxed to maintain this landscaping or, this open space. So unfortunately, it's a great financing mechanism for building infrastructure and for maintenance, but it doesn't work well in existing communities.
Okay, thank you, Kimberly. Any other comments?
Yeah, Dwayne, I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Hey, Frank, thanks. This is Commissioner Cadillo. Great presentation tonight. Appreciate it. I have a question in terms of the pavement rehabilitation projects in general. So my question is more like just, let's say, on general maintenance, on as far as, let's say, call it restriping the roads, right? So my question is, when do we determine roads would need to be restriped, or what category would roads need to be in before they are restriped? Because I remember back in the days when we restriped certain roads for various reasons, but
Right.
let's say the road didn't really need to have repairs done. So is that kind of factored into the street paver program as well, or
No,
or how?
the signing and striping is through our public works operations. Their street division is the one that would go out and look at what they need to do. Generally, the standard work that they do is in the summer. They go out and refresh all the striping around elementary schools and high schools, because it's okay. The kids are out. They can work with it. Well, even though they're year round, they can work with those schedules, but it's just one of those things that they do. But the rest of the city, then that's, I guess, more on a case by case. I couldn't really answer that since I don't supervise that group, but I do know that they have certain duties, certain times of the years where they will do certain restriping.
Okay, so they're two separate
Yes.
functions. Oh, okay.
But what
All right, thanks.
happens is, we will work with, like, even our traffic engineering, our safety commission. A recommendation will be made to change the striping on a particular street. And it may be advantageous for us to say, okay, that's fine, but it's going to get repaved next year. Can we wait a year? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, well, then we save a lot of money. It's going to take an extra year.
Right,
And
exactly.
so that's kind of what happens is, and we're constantly coordinating back and forth between departments and even within our department on any proposed signing and striping changes, because when the pavement program sort of erases all the striping because the roadway got resurfaced, it's a clean start.
Right. Okay. So that was my question on, at what point is that crossover? So we're not restriping a road today that's going to have to be restriped in 2 years again because maintenance
Correct.
needs to be done.
No,
So,
and,
okay,
and I'll bring that up. I'll bring that up in the last presentation on the active transportation program, because there's recommendations that work well with our pavement program.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, Frank.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Okay, Frank, go ahead and move to your next one.
All right, next slide, please. And so this is the wastewater system program. The city of Chula Vista maintains
Frank, hold on a
approximately.
second.
Oh,
Claudia, can you go to full screen mode on the presentation? Click on view.
It's not a PowerPoint. It's
Right. Then go full screen mode. Keep on going
okay.
down.
Here.
down. There you go.
Okay. Thank
There
you.
you go.
all right. The wastewater system program, we maintain approximately 500 miles of sewer lines, and we have more than 12,000 manholes. The city of Chula Vista's system is what's considered a collections system. We just collect sewage and then it goes to the treatment system, which is owned and operated by the city of San Diego. The city of San Diego, even though they may have their own collection system, they're regionally from the city of Del Mar and Poway south to the international border with Mexico. All our sewage goes to Point Loma. And so there's the Point Loma wastewater treatment plant in the background of the picture there. Next slide. Can you go to the next one?
Just use your arrow keys or the up and down.
On the keyboard.
There you go.
So when you look at the city, the wastewater system operates the most efficiently if it's a gravity system where the sewage flows from the highest point in elevation within the drainage basin, which is identified in a unique color on this graphic, and it flows generally in Chula Vista towards the west, towards the I-5 and Bay Boulevard area. But in the Rancho Del Rey, Bonita area, it flows north downhill towards the Sweetwater River. And so we have all these drainage basins in the city. There are some homes and some properties that are in sort of in canyon areas that we need a pump station. So there's several properties that will drain to one location nearby. And then the sewage is collected there and then pumped up in elevation into the gravity sewer system, and then on its way to Point Loma it goes. So that's just sort of like to give you fundamentals of the wastewater, and the drainage system kind of works the same way. Next slide, please. So the wastewater system is made up with, and those are the standard pipe diameter sizes on the first column. We don't have any 4-inch diameter. That's typically going to be private property laterals. But and it looks like we've got 770 feet of it. But generally, most of what we have is an 8-inch, but we go up to a 42-inch diameter sewer, and that's the one that's at Main Street crossing the I-5 freeway right at the interchange area there. And that's collecting all the sewage that starts all the way up at Rolling Hills Ranch, East Lake Trails, Vistas, down the Otay River Valley, and down Main Street. Next slide, please. So the 2.5 million linear feet of sewage, this is it. Another graphic that just shows by diameter size. Generally, as we go west, the sewage pipes get larger and larger diameter because they're picking up and collecting everything that's uphill, generally the eastern part of the city. Next slide. This is a graphic that we historically have brought to the GMOC since, I think, year 1 of the GMOC. The red horizontal line is the city's contractual capacity with the San Diego Metro sewer system. Chula Vista has rights to 20.864 million gallons per day to go into the city of San Diego system and ultimately go to Point Loma. And the population line is up in purple. And so as the city's population was growing, our wastewater master plan in 2014 estimated that we were going to follow that green dashed diagonal, and we were going to need additional capacity because we were going to go above the red horizontal line. What ended up happening was a series of decisions that the city made that helped reduce the amount of flow per person or per household. That what we've been reporting to the GMOC is the lower blue line with the black dots and the flow every one of those years. The left half with the white background is the actual flows. The gray background to the right of year 2020 is what we project the flows will be short term, 18 months out and 5 years out, and ultimately to build out. It looks like we're just going to squeak in under the metro capacity of 20.864 and end up at about 20.76, close enough that we should be fine. But a lot of that has happened where, if you look at the timeline about year 2004, before then, every house was billed the same amount on their sewer bill, but it didn't matter if you had 8 people in your house or 1 person in your house. We went to consumption-based rate in 2004 that now was based on your 2 consecutive winter average months of water use because you're not watering your lawn as much. And then we apply a reduction factor. And also the water agencies were getting, the water was costing them more to bring from Northern California. And so with that happening and the newer home having to comply with building code requirements for low flow toilets, sinks, showers, everything, we started seeing that the average consumption started dropping. So I kind of looked at this graphic, and population wise, the year 2020 was kind of where we were flowing back in 2011 and 2003. But the population has increased about 35% since 2003 to where we're at now in 2020. And the sewage flow is the same as it was back then. So all these things sort of helped each other to help us conserve and stay more closer to where that blue line is projected to be in the future than the green line. We do have a need to update our wastewater master plan, and that's a proposed capital program to be done in 2021 and begin in 2021 and finish in 2022. So I know this has a lot of information, but it's the easiest way for us to present the information to the GMOC. And so as far as the wastewater system is concerned, we're in great shape. Next slide. So I spoke a little bit about the capacity rights. And so in summary, we're going to be about 9 million gallons lower than we thought we were going to be by the time the city is built out. And so that's where we end up with wastewater. That's my last slide on wastewater. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, if you can go back to the last slide. That spike we had there leading up to 2020. Do you know what caused that?
A lot of homes came online in Otay Ranch over that time period. And so that seems to be what we best could think happened. The population is kind of also, the slope of that kind of increased too, but that's really, industry, also industrial breweries. We've had a couple of, the breweries that come in. And so that also doses a lot of water. And so it's a combination of development and industry business.
Okay. And in 2020, I guess with COVID, have you seen another spike go up since people are at home more?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because since Chula Vista is a bedroom community and most people leave the city to go to their jobs, we're starting to see our numbers go a little bit high. We haven't finished the reporting yet, but we're projecting that we're going to be closer to 17 million gallons, maybe in another 6 months or so. And so we'll see how we track when we get our final numbers.
Okay. And then one last question, and this is just my curiosity. When it reaches Point Loma, because I used to work out there, so I know the facility very well out there, and when it's coming in, you really smell it. Where does it go when they do their treatment? Does it go into the ocean, or what happens to it?
There's I think it's a mile-long ocean outfall, but what we've done, and purposely I did the graph this way every 5 years down there at the bottom, because that reminds me that every time we hit the 5-year timeline, that's when we have to renew our permit with the EPA for the secondary treatment. What's happened now is the last time that we went through it in 2015, now San Diego has the pure water program. And so the agreement that was reached with the EPA is that Point Loma, I think, usually outputs about 180 to 200 million gallons per day. And Chula Vista is roughly 10% of that. And the quantity can't be exceeded anymore. So what's happening is the purple pipe for the recycled water for the landscape districts and all that, those other uses, we're having to sort of reduce how much goes into the ocean outfall, and there's specific targets on how much that's going to get reduced over the next, few years, decades, and all of that as the pure water program gets established.
Okay. Any commissioners have comments, questions? Okay, is that all your presentation, Frank?
The active transportation, and I can be very brief on the active transportation program. And so, next slide, please. What the active transportation program is a combination really of our bikeway master plan and our pedestrian master plan of 2011 and 2010 respectively. And it looked at what issues and opportunities we had for bicyclists and pedestrians and helped us prioritize what improvements that we needed to do. What it does not do, though, is dedicate specific funding for the projects. When we go through our capital improvement program development, we always start with master plans. What's the highest priority? Is the timing correct for us to move with this top priority, or do we have to go down the list and put project 3 or 4 in the next CIP because there's other reasons? So next slide. And so this is on our website. You can always Google Chula Vista ATP or Chula Vista Active Transportation Plan. Our council approved it last May, and all the documents that are in there, including a sidewalk survey done by another consultant. That's the last entry at the bottom of the pedestrian connectivity plan that's down at the bottom of that one. But it's available on our website. And we had a lot of outreach events that we did, questionnaires, a web page, city events that we had to gather input from the public about their bicycling and pedestrian issues. Next slide. So what's different now for us is the Bikeway Master Plan of 2011 only had 3 types of classes of bike facilities. A class 1's a bike path, which is separate from the roadway. A class 2 is a bike lane on the roadway striped. A class 3 is a bike route, just a sign on the side of a road like F Street or Hilltop without a bike lane that says, hey, this street takes you to a civic center or to the library or someplace like that. A class 4 is within the roadway as opposed to off the roadway, but it's barrier separated. And so that's something that is new to the area. And in purple, generally the 6-lane roadways east of 805, we have 3 lanes and a bike lane. The lanes are generously wide. And so as we get into our repaving of those streets east of 805, we have to restripe them. We'll have to narrow the lanes to about 11 feet. And then the room that's left over, we will probably gain about 3 feet, maybe 4 feet. And that would be the room for the barrier separated. And the barrier separated initially might just be striping. It may come back, depending on funding with grants, something a little bit more permanent. But there's a 3-foot rule now for bike separations from cars. And so at the very least, the first step is get the lanes narrowed, stripe that buffer area in, and we'll see where we go with the grants to make the barrier a permanent situation. But again, the barrier cannot be continuous. We may have driveways, we may have fire hydrants, we may have bus stops. So there's going to have to be gaps along the way, plus a need for a car breaks down. It'll have to pull over. So it's going to be one of those things where it's intermittent. But the message has to be clear that there's an area designated for bicyclists on the roadway. Next slide. So I know this is like an eye test, and I apologize for that. But the ATP plan says here are the top 10 bicycle priority projects. The H Street corridor is the top one, followed by Main Street, then J Street, East J Street, and then Palomar Street, East Palomar Street. So that's kind of how it worked out. The different categories are listed along the top in the far right columns with a point total at the very far right of the table. But that's not necessarily the sequencing that we're going to do because, for instance, for us, the highest priority project is really number 6, which is the Bay Boulevard Bayshore Bikeway gap that we have between E Street and H Street. And we've submitted a grant application for that one. And as part of the Bayfront, we need to get project number 6 completed as quickly as possible. Next slide. So now we go to the pedestrian side. And on this map, our ATP plan looked at what we have in the city, and it really broke it down into 3 different types of pedestrian facilities. In red are the districts or the highest amenity for pedestrians. The pedestrian is the priority in these areas, and that's the graphic that I have to the right. Therefore, the sidewalks are the widest. They have pedestrian scale lighting. They have street furniture, benches, and all of that for them. They have audible pedestrian signals, heavy textured crosswalks emphasized with like maybe a pattern or a texture out on the street. The car doesn't stop at the crosswalk, it stops behind it. And so all those amenities is what makes a district. So we have the downtown Chula Vista 3rd Avenue area, the Millennia area, and then the other one that's just starting in Otay Ranch Village 8 over by Olympian High School, just west of SR 125. Next slide. And so then the priority came out again for the pedestrian projects, and the highest priority is Industrial Boulevard. Why? Well, it's close to the trolley station at Palomar Street, and the #1 project is Anita Street to Ada Street, which is right there by the trolley, the highest amount of pedestrians. And then came Main Street, which isn't a surprise because Main Street is sort of like a hodgepodge of sidewalk, no sidewalk, street wide and street narrows and all of that. So it really didn't come as a surprise for us. It's Industrial Boulevard, Main Street again, then Palomar Street near the I-5 freeway. And then we have an area of J Street, Orange Avenue, and Anita Street. So we're doing very well in finishing up the gaps that are left in the city on the collector streets, the grid streets, the quarter-mile spacing streets on the west side of the city. On the east side, I think with the exception of Otay Lakes Road from Bonita Vista High School down to Bonita Road, that was intentional, that the sidewalk was put on one side and the other side is just more rural because of the topography. But we're working our way towards wrapping up on the west side. For residential streets that do not have sidewalks, those were approved that way. Whether they went through the planning commission and the council process and got approved without a sidewalk, or through the county and it got approved without a sidewalk, that's just the way that those were adopted. But we certainly are willing to put sidewalks in if the residents help form an improvement district and they share in the costs of the improvements. And we did that in the Castle Park area, and we also used federal funds to help us with that. So that's one way that we get those residential streets to comply. But again, that's the way they were approved. So we've concentrated on the bus route corridors, the major streets to the schools, to the shopping. And so that's kind of where the priorities were for that. So I think that concludes my presentation. The next slide is just the last slide for questions.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay, if not, I will now call for a 2-minute pause to allow the public to submit any final comments on the item before the commission. As a reminder, please refresh your view on the screen to ensure comments appear. The comment period for this item is now closed. Claudia, can you verify if we had any comments?
I didn't receive any comments.
Okay, thank you. Frank, thanks for your presentation. The next item is traffic engineering operations.
Well, good evening, commissioners. I'm Paul Oberbauer. I'm the senior engineer in traffic engineering. And Kim and Kim asked if I could assist with giving you an update on a plan that we've been working on lately. But I thought I'd also take the opportunity to give you a kind of a broader sense of what we do. Next slide, please. So when I think of traffic engineering, generally, I think of us having three main focus areas. First would be traffic access, which is really a supporting role to what Frank's team does. You just heard it's about equitable service to all transportation modes, as well as making sure the roads are being built where they're needed. We also assist, obviously, Development Services Department in that capacity. Our main focus, though, on a day-to-day basis is traffic safety, and I'll be speaking about the Local Road Safety Plan. And then also traffic efficiency, which is about congestion. And that has been in the past the purview of this commission in terms of the level of service, whereas traffic safety is in the purview of the Safety Commission. Next slide, please. So next slide. So what is a local road safety plan? Essentially, it documents our traffic safety planning process. We already do traffic safety planning, but this is going to be a more formal layout of how we do it. We will bring in all the traffic safety professionals, including traffic engineering, of course. We'll take the lead on it. We have input from police, fire, emergency services, schools, transit, Caltrans, essentially anybody who makes extensive use of our roadway network. And we get public input through the Safety Commission. We'll essentially take all our collision data that has occurred in the latest 5 years and look for hotspots and challenge areas. So we're looking at all the factors that lead to a serious injury or a fatality and try to address those factors. And the framework that we use to sort of conceptualize all that is called the 5 E's, which I'll get into in a moment. And it sort of just essentially prioritizes our, strategies for addressing a lot of traffic safety issues in the city and trying to strategically, implement different investments in different areas, with a more systematic way of doing it, as opposed to what we do is on a year-to-year basis. This is trying to kind of bring it all together in a way. So we're kind of following the model that the state has set for us. Next slide, please. So the 5 E's of traffic safety are certainly engineering, which incorporates emerging technologies. This is, where self-driving cars can come into play, things like that. But engineering also is, anything from the striping on the road, signs on the side of the road, pavement condition, all those things come into play. Education is, public outreach, trying to make sure everybody's doing their best in terms of driver behavior. Enforcement is obviously police's role. Evaluation will be our opportunity to reassess what the progress has been in terms of how many collisions have occurred. And then emergency response is a key factor that we sort of incorporate that the state doesn't, because response times is a key component as well. Next slide, please. So why are we doing one now? The main reason is it's been a big focus area for the FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, as well as Caltrans. So they have provided us grant funding, fortunately, which certainly helps to prepare one. And it is going to be required for us to pursue future highway safety grant opportunities. So we will need one, but it's also just beneficial to have one in general. And they've given us the opportunity to do that, to pursue that now. And then, like I mentioned, it's going to be a way to build on and formalize what we currently do in terms of traffic safety. Next slide, please. So the way we collect our collision data is it all starts at the police department. You can see the badge there. And they pass their data on to the Highway Patrol, who manages the statewide database for all the collisions in the state. And that has usually a lag of about 6 to 9 months. And then it disperses out to those different sources you see on the right in different timeframes. Generally, we're using the Crossroads software and TIMS, and this is sort of like the most widely accepted collision data. However, the police department has been a great help to us in giving us the collisions dashboard that you see on the left, which is what gives us raw collision data in a lag of about 1 to 4 weeks. All this data is redacted. There's no information on the drivers themselves, except for broad, demographic information and so forth. But really, it's to give us an insight into what, on aggregate, is happening on these collisions, and hopefully we can figure out ways to address areas that may lead to more collisions and try to counter those. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we already do plan for safety, and then kind of boils down to this process where annually at the top, we collect the data that we have. Usually it's like a ranking of the highest collision intersections, for example, highest collision road segments. And then we evaluate all of them and prioritize and plan for them. So we try to see what the collisions are typically involving. Was it a curvy road? Was it nighttime? Were there DUIs? Not much we can do about those on the traffic engineering side. Were there slick roads, during rain? Those kinds of things. And then we determine what would be an appropriate countermeasure for that. Do we need to do what's called traffic calming, where we're going to install something that would slow traffic down, like narrowing the curb to curb width is a rather drastic one, or just doing a speed feedback sign, which is, those automatic signs where it has a little radar in it detecting your speed, and it'll say your speed is such and such, and go from there. Then we propose the projects for funding. Obviously, as you can imagine, we have finite resources, and so we're one of the mouths that need to be fed, and sometimes they get funded, and obviously the ones that have the highest need rise to the top. And then we ultimately construct them, and then we get the data once the construction's done on how it's performing and what all the collisions are doing in the city, and try to kind of go to the next one. And so all along the way, we're addressing citizen requests right in the middle there. And that's really a lot of what our day-to-day is we get requests from citizens saying people are driving too fast on my street, or there's illegal parking, or something to that effect. And all the time, we're doing like a miniature version of this process where we see if there really is an issue, we verify it, we determine what the appropriate countermeasure would be. And then if we have programmatic funding where we can do small improvements here and there, installing signs here and there, doing some minor striping additions, things like that. And so we do that and we implement those, and then all that data gets collected again in the future. And so we're doing this constantly, but then there's this overall cycle that we carry out on an annual basis. And so the local road safety plan is going to kind of really boil this down into what a real, like, I guess you could call it like a playbook of what we're going to do on a routine basis. And right now we're looking at biannually for doing a really systematic. And what I mean by that is we're going to collect even more data than we have, roadway characteristic data and so on, GIS data, and kind of bring it all together so that we can look at everything. Whereas so far we've been looking at collision data and everything that's associated with it, like I mentioned, demographics, roadway conditions, roadway characteristics that we observe, but maybe aren't the case when the collision occurred, and so forth. Next slide, please. So this is just a menu of countermeasures that the FHWA sanctions. This isn't all of the tools at our disposal, but it's kind of a nice slide to summarize a lot of the ones that the FHWA espouses. Next slide, please. So right now we're looking at all the data analysis. The GIS department's been very helpful in pulling together the roadway data and then bringing in the collision data that we currently have. And then we're going to do a lot of statistics with it and determine what factors are most frequently seen with collisions that result in serious injury or fatality. And then from there, we can work on the planning. And so then that's where I mentioned later on, we're going to work on countermeasure planning. We'll draft up the plan, and we're looking at presenting this to council in August. Next slide, please. And now I'll shift gears and go on to traffic congestion and the level of service. Next slide. So the level of service has been our metric of choice when reporting to the GMOC. It's what the threshold standard is based on. But as I know you're aware, Senate Bill 743 has changed that from the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, where they have selected, and they being the state has selected, vehicle miles traveled as the metric of choice for environmental impact. And it's sort of, if you can think of it as, it's a harder concept to get your mind around than the level of service, but really it's the measurement of all the driving that's going on in an area that you care about over a time period that you care about. So everything in West Chula Vista over a year, all the driving comes up in a VMT, for example. And the goal or the intent of Senate Bill 743 was to prioritize urban redevelopment, reduce greenhouse gases, and that sort of thing. But the problem with it from our traffic operations side of things is it's really hard to measure on a regular basis. Like, we report LOS to you on an annual basis based on our measurements. But with VMT, it's not really easy to do that, because essentially how they do it is you get a bunch of participants to volunteer their driving habits and to report those driving habits to a central authority who synthesizes all the data and creates a model. And that central authority is SANDAG, and they do that. And they've recently built up a large model that brings that all together. But that model won't get updated for some time. I wouldn't know exactly, it's usually in the span of a few years. So we can't really report back on an annual basis on that. And in addition, the VMT doesn't give us a lot of useful information on how to manage roadway congestion, and I'll get to that in a moment. Next slide, please. So what about level of service? As you may be aware, level of service is measuring congestion based on vehicle delay. So it changes all across the day. The peak period is what we care about, because that's worst case scenario. And as I mentioned, it is no longer an environmental quality metric anymore. So it doesn't apply to CEQA, but we still care a lot about it because it helps us find bottlenecks and hotspots. And as I'm sure you can relate, a lot of drivers still care about not having too much congestion out there. And the best part is that it's easiest to measure. So just to give you a sense of how we do it, we drive a vehicle through traffic during the peak period, and we measure the travel time over the point A to point B. And then there's the formulas in the highway capacity manual to help us determine the level of service. And so to kind of give you a sense for what it is level service relative to VMT is, if you could imagine having a garden hose and it's really long, spread across your whole yard, and you can't see it all, and there's a kink somewhere and you don't know where exactly it is. If you turn on your faucet for, like, say 5 minutes, VMT would say, well, you got 2 gallons of water in those 5 minutes. And that's nice to know, but it didn't tell you anything about where the kink was. So imagine going into the hose and going along with the water and seeing where the water flow is slowing down, and then you can determine where the kink is. And that's kind of just a really oversimplification of how LOS is still helpful to us versus VMT. And with that, I appreciate your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Any commissioners have questions?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Commissioner Torres. Over the last couple of years, I'm sure you're going to deal with this with your presentation to the Safety Commission, but over the last couple of years, based on reports by the local news, is that there's been an inordinate amount of, I'll put it in that terms, an inordinate amount of pedestrian fatalities on Broadway, Broadway and E, Broadway and H, Broadway and J, if I can recall. So how are you dealing with that as part of your analysis in try to ameliorate or reduce potential pedestrian fatalities on Broadway and just throughout Chula Vista?
Yes, thanks for the question. I'm not familiar specifically with Broadway. I know that some of those intersections do rank high in our rankings that we look at on an annual basis. I can't tell you specifically on the local road safety plan side where it's fitting in. since we haven't finished doing all the number crunching. But from our previous experience, you're correct in saying that Broadway has definitely been one that has a higher frequency of being in the upper ranks. I don't think it's been number one, but I agree that it would be like in the top 10 in that northern portion that you mentioned. And the biggest answer I would say to that is that we currently have what is called a road diet, so we're reducing the lane count, and this will occur from C to G Street along Broadway, primarily to accommodate a bike lane that will be buffered, meaning that it has a striped distance. You could actually see it on the slide there. There's that little hatched stripe zone between the vehicles and the bike lane. And so between that and improved vehicle detection equipment that we've installed on the signals in this area, we think that that will assist with improving pedestrian and bicycle safety along the corridor. I should note, though, that the bike lanes on Broadway project's going the full length of Broadway from C Street to Main Street. However, that road diet that I mentioned is only from C Street to G Street.
Got it.
Okay, any other questions from commissioners? Good. If not, thank you, Paul, for your presentation.
Thank you.
I will now call for a 2-minute pause to allow the public to submit any final comments to the item before the commission. As a reminder, please refresh your screen to ensure new comments appear. The comment period for this item is now closed. Did we get any comments, Claudia?
No, I did not receive any.
Good, thank you. The next item on the agenda is update from Kimberly Elliott. Kimberly, go ahead.
Yes, hi, Claudia's going to pull this up. I've made a few changes to our kind of working document here and just want to point those out to you. So public safety is the same, housing, transportation and land use. I've added traffic safety and efficiency, as you just heard from Paul, and then active transportation, which you heard from Frank about focus on pedestrian and bicycle transportation and prioritizing that. Connected communities is the same. Next slide, Claudia. Thank you. Economic development. We always have business expansion retention. One of the things they're really focusing on, I think is a good one to look at, is inclusive economic development. to make sure that all citizens, regardless of their background are getting opportunities. And then diverse economic base as well, which is, as a city, it's important that we have, don't have all our eggs in one basket, so to speak, with the tax revenue, that we have different types of revenue streams. And then the last one was they continue to focus on economic recovery from COVID. So I added that as well. Sustainability is the same, health and wellness. And then you might recall that I had smart city as the last topic, and we had Dennis come and speak with us. And I think what we learned from that is his role and his department's role is to really work with the other departments. And so what we saw was in the police department, they're engaged in a really great technology. And, under education, we got hotspots to a lot of the schools for the children so they could do remote school. So it didn't really make sense to me to have as a standalone. So instead, I added infrastructure. And I think that looking at these annual reports that the engineering department generates is a good thing for this commission to review. And then next slide, Claudia. So I updated the schedule. I'm going to Planning Commission next Thursday just to give them an overview of everything we've done to date and get input from them. And then that next night, Kim will be presenting the FY20 annual report at the joint meeting that you all will be at with Planning Commission and City Council. The next GMOC meeting we have planned for February 2nd, and we've invited Marlon King, our Emergency Services Coordinator, to talk about emergency preparedness, which is a topic that you all suggested would be a good one to look at. Then what I'd like to do is Kim and I really need to sit down, go back to the departments and our subject matter experts and really kind of synthesize this information for you, and also discuss our findings with management. So we'd like to go dark in March with have no GMOC meetings, kind of end of February, March, just only one meeting in February. And then come back to you in, say, April or so with the draft proposal for your consideration and review. Then we can spend multiple meetings on that in April and May, refining and discussing. And then I'm targeting a June Planning Commission and July City Council. So that's the updated schedule. If anyone has any questions, Chairman.
So Kim, when you say draft proposal, is that the updated questionnaires and the actual city charter, or
it would be the revised ordinance?
Okay. So it would just be the ordinance. We want
just the ordinance, not the questionnaires necessarily.
Okay.
And we want to look at, one thing is what form should this take going forward? Do we do the questionnaires? How's that all going to work? So we just need some time to think that through and work with the other departments.
So would that be in the ordinance?
Pardon?
Would that be in the ordinance, or what's your thought process on that?
What would be?
What you just said, whether we do questionnaires or, what's the exchange of data between the commission and the city. Okay.
So we'll come forward with, an outline and something more substantive than what we've you've seen so far. So far we've just, we've had all the subject matter experts in, we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot being new to the city, and now we'll just synthesize all that data and come back with some recommendations.
Although, if I could jump in terms of the questionnaires, this is Kim, sorry. We may not actually include that in the ordinance portion because it's very specific. And then if we decided that we didn't want to do that in the future, we'd have to change the ordinance.
Right, right. Yeah, this
Right,
is
I
Commissioner
guess
Torres. Is that, if I can interject, this is Commissioner Torres, is that with regard to the ordinance, what you're really talking about are the new thresholds and the new performance metrics. That's what you're talking about under these, under the schema that you just presented, under these quality of life topics. So the quality of life topics would have thresholds, new performance metrics, and that's what's going to be presented. Now, how that is quantified, is that going to be through questionnaires and yada yada? That's a process issue that I don't think the ordinance will address. I mean, that's up to staff of the GMOC. But let me ask you this question. I'm looking at this timetable, and so the concern that I have is that April and May, we go dark March, but in April and May, I would assume we're going to have like 3-4 meetings so we can really flesh this all out, because there's been a lot of information provided to us, and I don't know from my perspective whether or not all the GMOC members are really on board with, you know, some of the discussion or most of the discussion or the directions of how everything's going. And I'm sure that they're going to want to opine on anything that's developed by staff. You know what I mean? This is going to be such a whole new ballgame for the GMOC.
Right.
Right, and that's exactly where I'm thinking too, because I mean, we see basically an outline, but there's no meat to the outline yet.
So
and
that,
how does this affect the next report? I mean, if we're talking July before we get a new charter, for lack of a better word, or when's the next reporting period start?
it would start again, well, July 1, the next fiscal year.
Yeah, we'd start working on the start working on the growth forecast end of summer after the fiscal year ends, as we normally do. And then if we decide to go with questionnaires, start working on draft questionnaires for you to review and then send those out by October.
So I'm agreeing, Chairman Hooker and Chairman Torres, that's exactly my thought, is that April and May would be, we could have at least 4 meetings, as you know, we have 2 meetings per month now, that to really spend some time on this.
Okay, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I just got concerns of being able to get all that done and being able to have a full commission in place. I mean, we're still missing what, 2 or 3 people? What's the latest on filling those vacancies?
I believe the clerk's office is working on it. That's in their ball court.
Yeah. Okay.
Court.
I just got concerned.
Yes.
To me, it seems like a lot of work that.
And you're right.
Far behind.
I may come back to you and say, we're just not going to make these dates. So, but we'll do our best.
So Kim, let me ask you on this presentation that we have in front of us, is this what's going to be provided to the Planning Commission on the 27th?
Yes, with just a little more detail of, the people that came, talk about the people that came and
right.
Yeah, but nothing, and just showing where we've been.
right, talking about the process.
Process exactly, but getting their input. I want them to know that this is still very preliminary and, you know, we want their input, so.
And that's my concern right there. I mean, you keep on using those words. This is very preliminary, but we've been at this for
Yes.
a while.
Well, in terms of the planning commission, but there's nothing approved yet. That's what I mean.
Right, I
Right.
understand that, but like I said, we've been at this a while and we haven't progressed further than an outline. I guess that's what my concern is.
Okay. I hear your concern. I think it's just a longer process than
And I think we're still
anticipated.
Yeah, and we're still in the information gathering mode, still getting educated about what, would be best to include.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I have no problems with that. From a planning commission perspective, is that the 27th, you give it the presentation, you know, it's going to be a little bit more than this. It's going to be talking about process. I think when you're going to talk about the whole thing, and I'm glad that now you've updated what is going to be included under economic development. I think the planning commission is definitely going to be focused on that. And I think what they're very much going to like is that the fact that after the GMOC staff, GMOC itself with staff goes through all its deliberations and puts pen to paper and develop its draft, it will come then back to the planning commission for review and recommendation in June before it goes to the city council. So that way to give the planning commission one last thought, if you will, to review and comment, on the entire package, but especially with regard to the economic development component. I think that'll help assuage a lot of concern on the planning commission. So I think that'll go far.
And is there a plan to have, let's say the planning commission reviews and provide recommendations in June. Are we going to get back together as the GMOC to review those planning commission comments before it goes to city council?
I'm sure we can, create an additional meeting if necessary in between the two.
I would strongly recommend that because its own agenda. I don't know if they would, but you never know. You know what I mean?
And I'd like to, at the February 2nd meeting, report out to you all what the planning commission's discussion and recommendations were at this January 27th meeting.
Kim, and I think that's actually the 4th, or am I looking at the wrong year?
Sorry, you could be right. I think.
Let's see. Yeah, I think it's the 4th.
4th. Apologize.
Yep, no problem. And then I think there'll probably be 1 or 2 stakeholder meetings in there too somewhere, right, Kim?
Yeah, well, and that's what we'll discuss with management, is to how all that would work. But we did talk about having some more stakeholder meetings.
Okay, any other commissioners have questions or comments? Okay, if not, I will now call for a 2-minute pause to allow the public to submit any final comments on the item before the commission. As a reminder, please refresh your screen to ensure new comments appear.
Sorry, looks like I lost my meeting. We're still all on. Oh, shoot. Patricia, do you know where I would go?
I'm trying to share my screen, Claudia. We're about a minute into the timer.
Yeah,
Let me see if I can help. Hold on just a moment.
yeah, because I set the meeting to end like at 7:30, so I think it kicked me out, even though
Oh.
we're still in it.
Yes, I think that's what happened. You're right. Well, we have about another minute to go.
Okay, let me
Just let me know
see.
when.
Chair Hooker, the 2-minute timer has come up.
Okay, so the commenting period for this item is now closed. Were there any comments?
No comments received.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to other business. Any staff comments?
Kim has already mentioned it, but I'd just like to remind you that we do have our joint meeting next Thursday. I think 5 of you have confirmed that you will be present. We wanted to make sure that we had a quorum. Hopefully we'll get all 7 commissioners to be there that evening. And that will be at 6 p.m. And it will be with Planning Commission and City Council. So we'll have a very crowded screen next week. So
Lots of boxes.
Okay. Kim Elliott?
I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Okay, Claudia or Patricia?
If I could just let the commissioners know that for the joint workshop, that the WebEx link will be shared by the city clerk or by Ed Chu. So just keep an eye out for a link from, again, the city clerk, probably Christina Hernandez, or Ed Chu for the joint workshop.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair comments. I have no comments right now. So commissioners, any comments?
Chair Hooker, this is Commissioner Cadillo. I have a comment or question, actually.
Go ahead.
Okay, I actually lost you guys momentarily when you guys were discussing the quality of life issues and the thresholds. So I'm not really sure what was said, but if you guys could maybe repeat or answer my question. So because I'm a little bit concerned as well. I think Commissioner Torres and Commissioner Hooker had mentioned about the timeline and what we've gotten accomplished on this little project we're undertaking here. So so what is the meeting schedule like? Do we have an updated meeting schedule between now and the next several months?
Yes.
So we can appropriately discuss this to where we have enough time for the back and forth that needs to be, undertaken to get this done right? And do we have any meetings that are specifically for this? Maybe even an extra meeting. So I may have missed all that. So I apologize if I did, but can you run
That's
that?
okay. Yes, we talked about, and Claudia, I don't know if you can pull that schedule back up, but we will have a meeting in March, or I'm sorry, February 4th. And then Kim and I then need to work with management and staff to bring you back something, with more meat. And that will be in April. So we'll have all of April. So if we have 2 meetings in April, 2 meetings in May, that's 4 meetings. We get more if you want to really dive into what we present and have a lot of more discussion. And then from there, we'll go for.
So the meetings that you just mentioned, but we're also going to be discussing normal business during those meetings as well, right?
No, because the FY 21 report we won't start work on that until say August.
Okay, because I
This
thought
would usually
very-
be our break, Rodney.
what's that?
This would usually be our break.
Mhm.
That would be our break then? Okay, so then they are,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
want to make sure that, that we're not, I mean, there's a lot of work for staff to do. There's a lot for the commissioners to digest. There's going to be some back and forth. So I just want to make sure, like, not everybody or anybody feels like they're rushed, to do this. Because I want to make sure, we do this right.
Totally agree. We don't want to rush this, and if we need to add more meetings, we can.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Any other commissioners have comments? Okay, it is now 7:56, and I will close this meeting out. Our next meeting is January 28th at 6 o'clock.
Yep.
Is that right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
All righty. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.